All right, let's talk about something that feels like it's simmering just beneath the surface of our daily lives. You see it in the headlines that flash across your phone, you hear whispers of it in podcasts, and it's a question that's starting to creep into dinner table conversations all over the world. From a quiet suburb in Ohio to a bustling cafe in Seoul, people are asking the same fundamental question, even if they phrase it differently. What is happening to the world order we've always known? And more pointedly, is the world really on the path to isolating the United States? Now I know that sounds incredibly dramatic. It conjures up images of a fortress America, cut off from a world it once led, and for decades the very idea would have been unthinkable. But the ground beneath our feet is shifting. This isn't about one single event or one single headline. It's about a series of powerful undercurrents that are converging, reshaping the geopolitical map right before our very eyes. So stick with me. To really understand what's going on, we need to pull back the curtain and look at the historical forces, the economic rivalries, and the technological revolutions that are driving this change. For the better part of the last century, and especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States wasn't just a superpower. It was arguably the world's only superpower. This was the unipolar moment. The US has spent decades as a globe-trotting architect of the international system. It wrote the blueprints for the global economy, championing institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. It established the security architecture that defined alliances with NATO as its cornerstone. American culture, its movies, its music, its democratic ideals became a powerful form of soft power, shaping aspirations worldwide. The US was the indispensable nation, the one everyone called to mediate intractable conflicts. It was American diplomacy that brokered peace between Egypt and Israel, and that ended the war in Bosnia. It was the US setting the rules of global trade, and the US Navy guaranteeing the freedom of the seas that allowed global commerce to flourish. But this leadership wasn't always universally celebrated. Decisions seen as vital to American interests were often viewed by others as unilateral overreach. The invasion of Iraq without a broad UN consensus, the extensive use of drone warfare, and the perception of a my way or the highway approach to diplomacy, that ruffled more than a few feathers. This created a reservoir of resentment and a quiet, growing desire among other nations for a world where power was more evenly distributed. For a long time, there was no viable alternative, but lately that dominance doesn't seem quite so unshakable. That old foundation is showing cracks. Let's unpack why. First, and perhaps most importantly, we're witnessing the rise of rival blocs and the dawn of a truly multipolar world. The era of a single dominant power is giving way to one with multiple centers of influence. And at the heart of this shift are two nations in particular. China and Russia aren't just flexing their muscles anymore. They are actively and strategically building an alternative world order. China, through its sheer economic momentum, has become the workshop of the world and a banker to developing nations. Its Belt and Road Initiative is the most ambitious infrastructure project in human history, creating new trade routes, ports, and railways that are all centered on Beijing, and it's stepping into diplomatic vacuums. When China successfully brokered a deal to restore relations between longtime rivals Saudi Arabia and Iran, it was a seismic event. It signaled that the US was no longer the only power capable of being the chief power broker in the Middle East. Russia, while economically weaker, plays the role of the strategic disruptor. It uses its vast energy resources, its potent military, and its sophisticated cyber capabilities to challenge Western dominance and forge partnerships of convenience with any country feeling sidelined by the US. And the most visible symbol of this emerging alternative is the BRICS bloc. What started as an acronym for the fast-growing economies of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa has transformed into a formal political club, and it's expanding. The recent inclusion of major energy players like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Iran, alongside strategically important nations like Egypt and Ethiopia, is a profound statement. This is no longer just a talk shop. They are building alliances and creating parallel institutions, like the New Development Bank, as direct alternatives to the Western-led World Bank and IMF. And this leads to one of the biggest threats to American influence, the challenge to the US dollar. For over 70 years, the dollar has been the world's reserve currency. Oil and most other commodities are priced in dollars. This dollar dominance gives the US immense economic power and the ability to impose powerful sanctions. But now, these countries are actively talking about ditching the dollar in trade. We're seeing it happen in real time. Russia and China trading in yuan and rubles, India buying Russian oil in rupees, Brazil and China executing deals in their own currencies. This de-dollarization is a slow burn, not an overnight fire. But every transaction that bypasses the dollar chips away at a cornerstone of American power. It's a huge deal because the dollar's supremacy is what keeps the US at the absolute center of world finance. Then you've got America's own foreign policy choices, which some analysts argue have been self-inflicted wounds. The America First approach led to a withdrawal from key international agreements. Take the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a massive trade deal designed specifically to counter China's economic influence in Asia. The US architected it, then abruptly pulled out, leaving a vacuum that China is now eagerly trying to fill. Pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord and the Iran nuclear deal sent a message to allies and adversaries alike. That America's word might not be its bond, that its commitments can change dramatically from one administration to the next. This perception of unreliability makes it harder for allies to stake their political futures on partnership with Washington. The aggressive use of trade wars and sanctions has also had unintended consequences. While intended to protect American jobs or punish adversaries, imposing tariffs on close allies like Canada and the European Union caused deep friction. And the frequent, widespread use of financial sanctions, especially the freezing of Russia's central bank assets, was a wake-up call for the rest of the world. It demonstrated just how much power the US wields over the global financial system, and in doing so, it supercharged the very efforts to create the alternative systems we just talked about. Finally, we're also seeing tech wars heat up. This is the new great game and the battleground is digital. The technologies that will define the 21st century are up for grabs and the competition is fierce. Take 5G. This isn't just about faster downloads, it's the underlying infrastructure for the Internet of Things, for smart cities, for autonomous vehicles. The country that builds the world's 5G networks will have a massive strategic advantage, which is why the US launched a global campaign to try and block countries from using technology from Chinese giant Huawei. And even more critical is the war over semiconductors. These tiny chips are the brains in everything from your iPhone to a fighter jet. The US has launched an all-out effort to hobble China's ability to produce high-end chips while simultaneously pouring billions into rebuilding its own domestic manufacturing. This chip war is forcing the entire world to navigate a complex web of restrictions, disrupting supply chains and pushing China to accelerate its own drive for technological self-sufficiency. It risks splitting the world into two separate, incompatible tech ecosystems, and then there's AI, artificial intelligence. This is the ultimate frontier. The nation that leads in AI could dominate the 21st century economy and military landscape. The race between the US and China for AI supremacy is a sprint for data, for talent, and for raw computing power. So is the world isolating the United States? Perhaps isolating isn't the right word. The US remains an immense military and economic power with strong alliances, but it's clear the age of uncontested American dominance is over. What we're seeing is the end of the unipolar moment and the difficult, messy birth of a new, more complex and competitive global order. The US is no longer the only one setting the rules. It's now one powerful player, perhaps still the most powerful, but a player nonetheless, on a board with more pieces than ever before.